The lecture hall buzzed with the quiet conversations of 200 cadets from across the Galactic Defense Coalition. Representatives from 47 species sat in tiered rows, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors, textures, and biological adaptations. At the front of the massive auditorium, Admiral Kethvar of the Zelanian High Command stood behind a podium, his forearms moving in practiced gestures as holographic displays flickered to life around him. Today, we examine tactical deployment scenarios involving member species of the Coalition, the Admiral announced, his translator converting his clicking speech into standard Galactic. Each species brings unique advantages to our unified military structure. In the third row, Cadet Zixta from Proxima leaned forward with interest. Her crystalline skin caught the light as she whispered to her study partner, "I wonder if they'll finally explain why Earth humans are classified so differently in the deployment manuals." Beside her, Teclon, from the gas giant Morpheus, adjusted his breathing apparatus and nodded. "The deployment ratios never made sense to me. Every other species follows standard mathematical models. But humans..." Their conversation was interrupted as the Admiral continued his presentation. "Let us begin with the Korthons." A holographic image appeared, showing the tall, muscular warriors that made up one of the Coalition's primary ground forces. Korthon warriors stand 3 meters tall and possess natural armor plating. Their deployment ratio for planetary assault operations is standardized at 10 Korthons per estimated 1,000 enemy combatants. Murmurs of approval rippled through the audience. The Korthons were well known for their battlefield prowess, and several Korthon cadets in the audience straightened with pride. "The aquatic depths walkers from Oceanus Prime," Admiral Kethvar continued, bringing up another display, "excel in underwater and amphibious operations. Their deployment ratio is 15 per 1,000 enemy combatants, accounting for their specialized environmental advantages." The presentation continued through various species. The insectoid Vexani, with their hive mind coordination, rated 8 per 1,000. The energy-manipulating photons from the light star systems rated 12 per 1,000. Each species had clear mathematical relationships between their biological advantages and their combat effectiveness. "Now," Admiral Kethvar said, his tone shifting slightly, "we come to Earth humans." A three-dimensional image materialized showing an average human male. Compared to the previous species, he looked remarkably unimpressive. No natural armor, no enhanced size, no obvious biological weapons or adaptations. Several cadets in the audience exchanged glances. Cadet Vorthak, from the crystalline homeworld of Shard Prime, raised one of his 6 arms. "Admiral, the display must be malfunctioning. This creature appears to have no evolutionary combat adaptations whatsoever." A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the various species present. Admiral Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what those familiar with Zelanian expressions recognized as amusement. "The display is functioning correctly, Cadet. Earth humans possess no natural armor, no enhanced physical capabilities, no environmental adaptations beyond basic survival needs. Their technology level upon first contact was approximately 2 centuries behind current Coalition standard." "Then why are they included in the Coalition Defense Forces at all?" asked Cadet Merdia from the aquatic world of Tidal Lock. "Surely they would be better suited for support roles, logistics, or technical positions." Admiral Kethvar's 4 eyes fixed on the cadet. "An interesting question. Perhaps we should examine their deployment ratios first." He gestured, and new numbers appeared floating beside the human image. The lecture hall fell silent. 1. Admiral Kethvar stated simply. "The recommended deployment ratio for Earth humans in standard combat operations is 1 human per 1,000 enemy combatants." The silence stretched for several heartbeats before erupting into chaos. Cadets from dozens of species began speaking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. That can't be correct. The numbers are backwards. Someone made an error. Admiral Kethvar raised all four arms for silence. I assure you the numbers are accurate. They have been verified through extensive combat analysis over the past decade since humans joined the coalition. Cadet Zixta's crystalline features twisted in confusion. Admiral, with respect, these numbers suggest that one human is equivalent to 10 Korthan warriors or 15 Depths Walkers. That's mathematically impossible based on their apparent physical limitations. Is it? Admiral Kethvar asked. Cadet Brakthar, you're Korthan. By your people's standards, what makes an effective warrior? The massive Korthan cadet straightened. Strength, Admiral. Natural weapons. Thick hide to absorb damage. Size to intimidate enemies. These are the foundations of combat effectiveness. Logical conclusions based on Korthan evolution, Admiral Kethvar agreed. Your people developed on a world where large predators ruled through physical dominance. Cadet Silthes, what about your people? The snake-like cadet from the desert world of Serpentis hissed softly. Speed and precision, Admiral. Strike quickly, deliver toxins. Withdraw before the enemy can respond. Combat is about being faster and more deadly than your opponent. Also logical, given your evolutionary pressures, Admiral Kethvar noted. Now, who can tell me about Earth's evolutionary environment? Cadet Elthrani from the peaceful garden world of Bloom raised a tentacle tentatively. According to the databases, Earth was unusual. Multiple competing species of similar intelligence, extreme climate variations, natural disasters, predators that specialized in hunting their ancestors specifically. Correct. But what's missing from that description that every other species takes for granted? The lecture hall remained quiet as cadets searched for the answer. Earth had no dominant species, Admiral Kethvar explained. Every other world we've encountered produced either one apex predator that ruled through strength or environmental factors that favored one specific adaptation strategy. Earth produced dozens of competing intelligence candidates, none of whom could achieve dominance through any single advantage. He gestured, and the holographic display changed to show an ancient Earth scene with various early human ancestors. Humans evolved not to be the strongest or the fastest or the most toxic. They evolved to survive when they were outmatched in every possible category. I still don't understand how this translates to military effectiveness, Cadet Vorthak insisted. Superior force concentration and battlefield control should determine victory, regardless of evolutionary history. Admiral Kethvar's mandibles clicked again. Perhaps a practical example would help. Last year, the hegemony tested our defensive perimeters around the Zeta Reticuli system. They sent a force of approximately 50,000 combat units to overwhelm the mining operation on Zeta 4. The cadets leaned forward with interest. The war with the hegemony was ongoing, and real combat examples were rare in their studies. Intelligence indicated the attack was designed to test our response capabilities, Admiral Kethvar continued. High Command decided to respond with a minimal force to avoid revealing our full defensive capabilities while still protecting the facility. How many ships did you send? Asked Cadet Merdia. Ships? Admiral Kethvar's eyes focused on her. No ships. The mining facility requested permission to handle the situation locally. Locally? Cadet Brakthar's natural armor plating rattled with confusion. Admiral, you said 50,000 enemy combatants. Even with defensive positions, you'd need thousands of coalition troops, maybe tens of thousands. The facility had a security detail of 50, Admiral Kethvar stated. The lecture hall erupted again, louder this time. Several cadets were standing, gesturing wildly as they tried to process this information. 50 versus 50,000? Cadet Zixta's voice cut through the noise. Admiral, that's 1,000 to 1 ratio. That's not a battle, that's a massacre. Indeed it was, Admiral Kethvar agreed, his tone carrying a weight that silenced the room. The entire hegemony force was eliminated within 6 hours. 0 coalition casualties, The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient hum of the building's life support systems seemed loud in the absolute quiet. "That's impossible," whispered Cadet Silthes. "There's no weapon system capable of those results with such a small crew." "The security detail wasn't using any special weapons," Admiral Kethvar said. "Standard coalition equipment, personal weapons, some defensive emplacements, basic vehicles, nothing that any of our species hadn't seen before." "Then how?" demanded Cadet Vorthak. "What tactical advantage could possibly overcome such numerical superiority?" Admiral Kethvar's four arms moved to call up a new display. Instead of numbers or technical specifications, it showed a simple question in floating text. "What is the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine?" "This question was posed to me 2 years ago by a graduating cadet, much like yourselves," Admiral Kethvar explained. "I admit at the time, I found it amusing. 1 human against trained enemy forces? Simple mathematics suggested the answer was obvious." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the assembled cadets. "I have since learned that when it comes to humans, mathematics as we understand it becomes insufficient." "What do you mean, insufficient?" Cadet Eltharani asked. "Every species in this room evolved optimization strategies," Admiral Kethvar explained. "Korthons optimized for strength and durability. Silthes's people optimized for speed and precision. The Vexani optimized for coordination and numerical advantage. But humans?" He gestured to the simple human image still floating in the center of the room. "Humans optimized for problem-solving under pressure. They didn't become the dominant species on Earth by being stronger than the other candidates. They did it by being more creative, more adaptable, and more willing to try solutions that shouldn't work." "That still doesn't explain 50 versus 50,000, Cadet Brakthar rumbled. "Doesn't it?" Admiral Kethvar challenged. "Tell me, Cadet, how would Korthan forces approach defending a mining facility?" "Establish perimeter positions, maximize firepower concentration, request reinforcement, hold until superior force arrives," Brakthar responded automatically. "Standard tactical doctrine," Admiral Kethvar agreed, "proven effective across hundreds of scenarios." "But what if the facility can't be reinforced? What if holding fixed positions means certain defeat due to numerical disadvantage?" "Then," Brakthar's confidence faltered, "then you fight with honor and hope to inflict maximum casualties before falling." "The human security chief had a different approach," Admiral Kethvar said. "Instead of defending the facility, he abandoned it entirely in the first hour of the attack." "He retreated?" Cadet Merdia sounded shocked. "No, he evacuated all non-combat personnel, set automated systems to fake continued normal operations, and moved his 50-person team to the asteroid field surrounding the facility." Admiral Kethvar brought up a tactical display showing the battle zone. The hegemony force, expecting standard defensive doctrine, surrounded the facility and prepared for a siege. They outnumbered any possible defenders by such a margin that they spread their forces thin, assuming no significant resistance. "And then," prompted Cadet Zixta, "then 50 humans proceeded to demonstrate why their species earned the designation persistence predators during their evolutionary development," Admiral Kethvar said. "For 6 hours, they appeared from asteroid hiding spots, struck at isolated enemy units, and vanished before response forces could engage. The tactical display showed red dots representing enemy forces beginning to flash and disappear in seemingly random locations around the facility." "But 50 against 50,000, Cadet Vorthak protested, "is actually 50 separate engagements of 1 human against 1,000 enemies," Admiral Kethvar corrected. "Except the humans didn't fight fair. They used asteroid terrain for concealment, struck supply convoys instead of fighting units, targeted command and communication systems, and turned the enemy's numerical advantage into a coordination nightmare. "That's actually brilliant," admitted Cadet Silthes slowly. The hegemony commanders kept requesting status updates from units that had been eliminated hours earlier, Admiral Kethvar continued. They couldn't maintain communication with their scattered forces. Supply lines were cut. Command structures collapsed. What began as an organized military operation devolved into 50,000 confused individuals trying to fight an enemy they couldn't locate. But surely the hegemony adapted once they understood the tactics. "They tried," Admiral Kethvar acknowledged. "They regrouped their scattered forces, established better communication protocols, and attempted to hunt the humans systematically. That's when the humans demonstrated the second part of their evolutionary advantage." Which was? Adaptability under pressure. The moment the hegemony changed their tactics, the humans changed theirs. They stopped hit-and-run attacks and started psychological warfare. They began broadcasting fake emergency signals from the facility. They used captured enemy equipment to send false orders. They even convinced one hegemony unit that another was actually composed of human infiltrators in disguise. Several cadets made sounds of disbelief. By hour 4, 3 separate hegemony units were actively fighting each other while the humans observed from concealment, Admiral Kethvar stated. By hour 6, the remaining hegemony forces were so demoralized and disorganized that they attempted to retreat. The humans intercepted and eliminated the retreat before it could escape to warn other hegemony forces about human tactical capabilities. The lecture hall remained silent as cadets processed this information. Finally, Cadet Eltharani spoke up. "Admiral, that still doesn't answer the original question. What is the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine?" Admiral Kethvar's 4 eyes gleamed. According to current data analysis across multiple combat encounters, the average human Marine accounts for approximately 1,200 enemy casualties before being neutralized. 1,200 to 1? Cadet Zixta's voice was barely audible. "That's the average," Admiral Kethvar confirmed. "Individual performances vary significantly. Some human units have achieved ratios exceeding 10,000 to 1 under optimal conditions." "How is that possible?" demanded Cadet Brakthar. "No single combatant can physically eliminate that many enemies." "You're thinking like a Korthan," Admiral Kethvar observed. "Direct physical confrontation, warrior against warrior. But humans don't fight like Korthans. They fight like humans." "I don't understand the difference," admitted Cadet Vorthak. Admiral Kethvar smiled, an expression that looked unsettling on his alien features. "That, cadet, is exactly why the question was asked in the first place. Tomorrow's lecture will examine specific case studies of human combat operations. I suggest you review your xenobiology texts tonight, particularly the sections on predator-prey relationships and adaptation strategies." He began shutting down the holographic displays. "Class dismissed." "Oh, and cadets? If any of you are still wondering why humans are classified as they are in our deployment manuals, I recommend you consider this. Every other species in the coalition has mathematical limits to their combat effectiveness. We can calculate optimal deployment ratios, predict casualty rates, and plan operations based on known capabilities. The Admiral paused at the classroom door. Humans are the only species for whom we've had to create a new classification category. Variable effectiveness, dependent on circumstantial factors. In simpler terms, we have no idea what they're actually capable of until they do it. As the cadets filed out of the lecture hall, their conversations were subdued and thoughtful. The simple question that had started the day's lesson continued to echo in their minds. What is the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine? Tomorrow they would learn that the answer was far more complicated than any of them had imagined. The next day promised revelations that would challenge everything they thought they knew about warfare, strategy, and the supposedly unremarkable species that had somehow earned the respect and fear of the entire galaxy. The next morning, the lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread through the academy about Admiral Kethvar's revelations, and attendance had nearly doubled. Cadets from advanced classes had requested permission to audit, and even several instructors sat in the back rows, their expressions skeptical but curious. Admiral Kethvar entered precisely on schedule, carrying a data pad and wearing what those familiar with Zelanian expressions might recognize as grim satisfaction. "I see our discussion yesterday has generated interest," he observed, his 4 eyes scanning the packed auditorium. "Good. Today we examine the specifics." He activated the holographic display system, and immediately the room filled with a 3-dimensional tactical map. "The siege of Kepler Station," he announced. 6 months ago. Hegemony forces, 47,000 regular infantry, 12,000 heavy assault units, orbital support from 15 destroyers. Coalition response, Marine Sergeant Elena Vasquez alone. Cadet Zixta leaned forward, her crystalline skin reflecting the holographic light. "Admiral, surely you mean Sergeant Vasquez led a battalion? A company at minimum?" "Negative. Sergeant Vasquez was on routine inspection when the hegemony attacked. All other coalition personnel were evacuated during the initial bombardment. Vasquez remained behind to ensure the evacuation was complete." The tactical display showed a massive space station orbiting a gas giant. Red indicators began appearing around it, representing incoming enemy forces in numbers that made the assembled cadets uncomfortable. "The station's defensive systems had been damaged in the opening barrage," Admiral Kethvar continued. "Automated weapons were offline. Shield generators were operating at 12%. By any tactical analysis, the station should have fallen within hours." "How long did it actually hold?" asked Cadet Theclon from the 3rd row. 17 days. The silence that followed was broken by Cadet Brakthar's rumbling voice. "Admiral, with respect, 17 days is impossible. One individual cannot maintain defensive operations against 60,000 enemies for over 2 weeks. "Sergeant Vasquez didn't maintain defensive operations," Admiral Kethvar corrected. "She conducted offensive operations." The tactical display zoomed in on the station itself, revealing its complex internal structure. Kepler Station is a research facility specializing in xenobiology. 17 decks, 4 kilometers in diameter, housing laboratories designed to safely contain and study the galaxy's most dangerous organisms. Several cadets exchanged glances as they began to understand the implications. "On day 1, Admiral Kethvar continued, Sergeant Vasquez allowed the hegemony forces to board the station unopposed. By day 2, they had secured the outer 7 decks and were advancing toward the core laboratories." "She surrendered?" Cadet Merdia sounded confused. "She let them think they had won," Admiral Kethvar clarified. While hegemony forces celebrated their easy victory and began establishing garrison posts throughout the outer decks, Sergeant Vasquez was accessing the station's research databases and biological containment systems. A new series of displays appeared, showing various alien creatures in containment. Some looked relatively harmless, others decidedly less so. The station housed specimens from 43 different worlds, Admiral Kethvar explained, including several that had been classified as extinction-level threats to their native ecosystems. Normally, these organisms were kept in maximum security containment with multiple redundant safety systems. "Normally," Cadet Vorthak repeated slowly, "but not during the siege?" "On day 3, containment failures began occurring in the outer decks," Admiral Kethvar said. "The hegemony forces initially assumed the damage was due to their own bombardment. They sent cleanup crews to handle what they thought were minor biological hazards." The display showed movement indicators throughout the station, red for hegemony forces, green for various released organisms, and a single blue dot deep in the core sections. "The Catherian shadow moths were released first," Admiral Kethvar noted. "Harmless to most species in small numbers, but they reproduce exponentially in artificial lighting and consume metal alloys. Within 6 hours, the outer deck lighting systems began failing." "That's Actually clever, admitted Cadet Silthes. Force the enemy to operate in darkness. The aquatic nerve shocks came next, Admiral Kethvar continued. Microscopic organisms that interfere with bioelectric nervous systems. Completely harmless to humans due to their different neurological structure, but devastating to most other species. The red indicators on the display began moving erratically, clustering in some areas while abandoning others entirely. By day 5, the hegemony forces were dealing with systematic equipment failures, communication disruptions, and what they assumed were multiple separate crises requiring immediate attention, Admiral Kethvar explained. They had no idea these were coordinated attacks. Cadet Elthrani raised a tentacle. Admiral, how did Sergeant Vasquez survive in an environment toxic to most life forms? Excellent question. Humans have an unusual resistance to biological hazards compared to most species. Their evolutionary environment exposed them to countless pathogens, toxins, and parasites. They developed extremely robust immune systems and unusual tolerance for environmental contamination. But she couldn't survive everything that was released, Cadet Zixta protested. Correct. Which is why Sergeant Vasquez created safe zones using the station's emergency shelters and modified life support systems. She essentially lived in a pressurized suit for 17 days, moving through maintenance tunnels while directing her biological allies. Biological allies? Several cadets asked simultaneously. Admiral Kethvar's mandibles clicked in amusement. The hegemony forces were fighting what they believed were unrelated containment breaches. In reality, Sergeant Vasquez was selectively releasing species that would target specific enemy positions while avoiding areas she needed to access. The display showed the blue dot moving through complex routes while green indicators spread strategically throughout the station. The screaming crystals of Andromol were particularly effective, Admiral Kethvar noted. Their sonic resonance interferes with most species' auditory systems and communication equipment. The hegemony forces lost coordinated command capability by day 7. What about the heavy assault units? Asked Cadet Brakthar. Surely armored forces wouldn't be affected by biological agents. The molecular acid slugs from Corrosive Prime disagree, Admiral Kethvar replied. They consume metal armor as a food source. Sergeant Vasquez released them in the main cargo bays where the heavy assault units were staged. The display showed the red indicators in those areas flickering and disappearing. By day 10, the hegemony forces were so demoralized and scattered that they began requesting immediate evacuation, Admiral Kethvar continued. However, Sergeant Vasquez had anticipated this possibility. She blocked their escape routes. She convinced the station's automated systems that the hegemony ships were infected with biological hazards and should not be allowed to dock. The orbital support destroyers received emergency broadcasts warning them that their landing parties had been exposed to unknown pathogens. So they abandoned their own troops? They tried. But when the destroyers attempted to leave the system, they discovered that several of their ship systems had been infiltrated by the same organisms that were loose on the station. Cadet Teclon's breathing apparatus whistled with surprise. How did biological organisms reach ships in vacuum? They didn't, Admiral Kethvar said, but Sergeant Vasquez had convinced the ship's automatic systems that they had. She accessed the station's communication array and transmitted falsified medical data indicating that the organisms could survive in ship environments. The destroyer's automated quarantine protocols activated and began shutting down non-essential systems. Psychological warfare, observed Cadet Silthes admiringly. Indeed. By day 15, the hegemony forces were trapped on a station overrun with hostile organisms, cut off from orbital support, unable to communicate effectively, and convinced that they were infected with unknown diseases. Morale collapsed entirely. What happened on day 17? Asked Cadet Elthrani. Coalition reinforcements arrived to find Sergeant Vasquez having tea in the station's executive conference room, Admiral Kethvar stated. She had recontained all the released organisms. restored life support to safe areas, and was reviewing technical manuals for the station's primary research equipment. And the hegemony forces? 43,000 casualties. 16,000 surrendered immediately upon seeing coalition ships arrive. The remaining hegemony forces had barricaded themselves in the outer docking bays and were desperately trying to signal their ships to return. The lecture hall was silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems. "One human," Cadet Brakthar said slowly, "against 60,000 enemy combatants, using the environment as a weapon." Sergeant Vasquez didn't use the environment, Admiral Kethvar corrected. She became part of it. This is the fundamental difference between human combat doctrine and every other species we've encountered. "I don't understand," admitted Cadet Vorthak. "Other species fight against their environment," Admiral Kethvar explained. "They overcome obstacles, adapt equipment to handle challenges, or modify conditions to suit their needs. Humans integrate with their environment. They make it fight for them." He gestured, and the display changed to show a new tactical scenario. The defense of Omega Centauri mining platform. 3 human technicians versus 8,000 Raider Coalition pirates. The platform had no weapons, no defenses, and no military equipment. "What happened?" Cadet Zixta asked, though her tone suggested she dreaded the answer. "The humans turned the entire mining operation into a weapon," Admiral Kethvar said. "They modified the asteroid extraction systems to fire chunks of rock at approaching ships. They used industrial plasma cutters as artillery. They even convinced the mining computer that the pirate ships were large asteroids requiring immediate processing." The casualty ratio? 8,000 to 0. The pirates' own greed worked against them. Every ship that was disabled by improvised weapons was immediately torn apart by automated mining equipment trying to process the unexpected asteroid. Cadet Merdia's aquatic features rippled with confusion. "Admiral, these examples suggest that humans don't actually fight. They manipulate situations until their enemies defeat themselves." "An astute observation," Admiral Kethvar acknowledged. "Human military doctrine is based on the principle that the most effective victory is one where your enemy eliminates themselves while believing they're fighting someone else entirely." "That's not warfare," protested Cadet Brakthar. I don't know what that is." "It's survival," Admiral Kethvar said simply. "Remember, humans evolved on a world where they were never the apex predator. They couldn't win through strength, speed, or natural weapons. They survived by being smarter, more creative, and more ruthless than anything trying to kill them." He brought up a new display showing population statistics. Every other species achieved dominance on their homeworld through some form of physical superiority. Humans achieved dominance by convincing every other potential dominant species to fight each other while humans watched from concealment. "That's..." Cadet Silthes paused, searching for words. "That's actually terrifying." "Indeed," Admiral Kethvar agreed. "Which brings us to the most important lesson about human combat effectiveness. They don't just fight their immediate enemies, they fight the concept of having enemies." "What do you mean?" "Every human military victory reduces the likelihood that anyone will want to fight humans in the future," Admiral Kethvar explained. "Other species win battles. Humans win the war before most opponents realize they're in one." "But surely there are limits," Cadet Vorthak insisted. "Eventually, sheer numbers must overcome strategy." Admiral Kethvar's 4 eyes focused on him with an expression that might have been pity. That assumption leads us to our final case study. The question that started this discussion. What is the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine? "We know the average," Cadet Elthrani said. 1,200 to 1. "That's the average for group operations," Admiral Kethvar corrected. "Individual performance varies significantly based on circumstances." He activated a new display, showing a single name and service record. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, Earth Marine Corps. Current status, active duty, current assignment, deep reconnaissance, hegemony border regions. Last month, Staff Sergeant Chen's reconnaissance patrol was intercepted by a hegemony battle fleet while investigating reports of military buildup in the Tau Ceti system. Admiral Kethvar continued. His transport was destroyed, his team was killed, and he was stranded alone on Tau Ceti Prime with no equipment except his personal weapons and survival gear. Against how many enemies? Intelligence estimates indicated approximately 200,000 hegemony troops preparing for a major offensive operation. 3 full armored divisions, orbital support, and advanced command structures. The assembled cadets stared at the numbers appearing on the display. Staff Sergeant Chen has been missing for 26 days, Admiral Kethvar stated. During that time, hegemony military communications in the Tau Ceti system have become increasingly erratic. Erratic how? Conflicting orders, supply disruptions, reports of sabotage, equipment failures, and what hegemony commanders describe as systematic operational breakdowns of unknown origin. Admiral Kethvar read from his datapad. Is Staff Sergeant Chen responsible for these problems? Unknown. What we do know is that yesterday, the entire hegemony force abandoned Tau Ceti Prime and retreated to deep space defensive positions. They retreated? All 200,000 of them? According to intercepted communications, Hegemony High Command believes the planet has been infiltrated by a coalition special operations force of significant size, Admiral Kethvar confirmed. Cadet Zixta's voice was barely audible. But it's just one man. Just one human, Admiral Kethvar corrected. And that, cadets, is the answer to our question. The casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine is not a number. It's a psychological effect. I don't understand. Admiral Kethvar smiled that unsettling expression again. Tomorrow, we'll examine why the Coalition High Command has classified all human combat operations above a certain level as reality alteration events requiring special documentation and analysis procedures. Reality alteration? When humans achieve sufficient numerical disadvantage, standard tactical analysis becomes insufficient to predict outcomes, Admiral Kethvar explained. We've had to develop new mathematical models that account for variables that shouldn't exist. He began shutting down the displays. Class dismissed. Tonight's assignment. Research the philosophical implications of warfare against opponents who don't follow the same logical frameworks you do. As cadets filed out, their conversations were even more subdued than the day before. The comfortable certainties of military science were crumbling around them, replaced by something far more complex and unsettling. Tomorrow's final lesson promised to shatter the last of their assumptions about warfare, strategy, and the deceptively simple species that had somehow redefined what victory meant in the modern galaxy. The question was no longer what the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine might be. The question was what happened when traditional concepts of warfare became inadequate to describe what humans were actually doing out there in the dark between the stars. The final day of Admiral Kethvar's special lecture series drew observers from across the Coalition Academy. The lecture hall had been moved to the main auditorium to accommodate the crowd. Military attachés from 30 different species sat alongside the original cadets, their expressions ranging from skeptical to deeply concerned. Admiral Kethvar entered carrying a sealed data case marked with security classifications that made several attendees uncomfortable. His usual composed demeanor seemed strained, as if he was about to reveal something he wasn't entirely certain should be shared. Today we conclude our examination of human military capabilities, he announced, his voice carrying unusual gravity. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels of Coalition Command. You are here because High Command has decided that our future officers need to understand what we're truly dealing with. He activated the holographic display, and immediately, a new header appeared. Reality alteration events, theoretical impossibilities, and practical results. Cadet Zixta felt her crystalline skin grow cold. Admiral, what exactly is a reality alteration event? An incident where observed tactical outcomes cannot be explained using established military science, physics, or probability theory, Admiral Kethvar replied. Until humans joined the coalition, such events were considered theoretical impossibilities. Now we document an average of 12 per month. The display showed a map of coalition space with red markers scattered throughout. There were far more markers than anyone in the audience had expected. Each marker represents a human military operation that required post-action analysis by our theoretical warfare department, Admiral Kethvar explained. These are engagements where the documented results shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of how combat works. Cadet Brakthar leaned forward, his armor plating rattling softly. Admiral, are you suggesting that humans somehow violate physical laws during combat? I'm suggesting that humans operate according to different laws than the ones we thought were universal, Admiral Kethvar corrected. Let me show you why. The display changed to show a detailed analysis chart. Standard tactical analysis assumes that military effectiveness follows predictable mathematical relationships. Force concentration, technological advantage, numerical superiority, and environmental factors combine in calculable ways to determine probable outcomes. That's basic military science, observed Cadet Vorthak. It's been proven accurate across thousands of conflicts involving dozens of species. Correct. It remains accurate for every species except humans, Admiral Kethvar confirmed. When humans are involved, our mathematical models break down completely. He gestured, and the display showed a complex equation filled with variables and probability curves. This is the standard combat effectiveness formula used by coalition tactical computers. Notice the clean mathematical relationships between all factors. The equation was elegant in its simplicity, showing how different combat variables interacted to produce predictable results. Now observe what happens when we input data from human combat operations, Admiral Kethvar said. The equation began changing, additional variables appearing faster than the audience could track. The clean mathematical relationships became increasingly complex, then actively chaotic. The formula becomes unsolvable, Admiral Kethvar stated. Not because we lack computational power, but because humans introduce variables that shouldn't exist. What kind of variables? Asked Cadet Merdia nervously. Environmental manipulation on scales that require reshaping the local laws of physics, Admiral Kethvar read from his datapad. Psychological effects that extend beyond the immediate battlefield to affect enemy operations in completely separate systems. Temporal anomalies where the effects of human actions appear to precede their causes. Temporal anomalies? Cadet Silthes's voice was barely a whisper. 3 weeks ago, the hegemony canceled a planned assault on the Vega system, Admiral Kethvar continued. Intelligence analysis revealed they made this decision because of expected human resistance. However, no humans were assigned to defend Vega at the time they made their decision. Maybe they had bad intelligence? No, they had perfect intelligence. There were no humans in the Vega system when they canceled their attack, Admiral Kethvar confirmed. Humans weren't assigned to Vega defenses until 5 days after the hegemony retreat. The auditorium erupted in confused murmurs. Several attendees were taking urgent notes, while others looked openly skeptical. That's impossible, declared Cadet Theclon. Effect cannot precede cause. Under normal circumstances, no, Admiral Kethvar agreed. But human military operations appear to create probability fields that extend beyond the immediate tactical situation. Probability fields? Enemies begin making suboptimal decisions before encountering humans directly, Admiral Kethvar explained. Supply lines become unreliable. Communication systems develop unexpected failures. Command structures begin second-guessing themselves. That could be explained by fear and reputation, suggested Cadet Eltharani. Initially, we thought so too, Admiral Kethvar acknowledged. Then we discovered that these effects occur even when enemies are unaware they're facing humans. He brought up a new case file. The liberation of Kepler 442b. Local resistance forces had been fighting hegemony occupation for 18 months with minimal success. Human advisors were secretly deployed to assist. How many advisors? Asked Cadet Zixta. 3. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, and Corporal Lisa Zhang. Their mission was to provide tactical consultation only. No direct combat involvement. What happened? Within 2 weeks of their arrival, hegemony forces began experiencing systemic failures across the entire planetary occupation, Admiral Kethvar stated. Supply convoys started taking longer routes for no apparent reason. Patrol schedules became erratic. Garrison commanders began requesting additional reinforcements despite facing no increased resistance. The human advisors were sabotaging operations? No. They were providing consultation to resistance cells in completely different regions of the planet, Admiral Kethvar corrected. The hegemony forces experiencing problems were hundreds of kilometers away from any areas where humans were operating. Then how? Unknown. What we do know is that the pattern is consistent across every conflict where humans are involved. Admiral Kethvar interrupted. Enemy forces begin behaving irrationally before any direct contact with human units. He called up a statistical analysis showing dozens of similar incidents. Probability analysis suggests that these effects represent a fundamental alteration in local space-time causality. Admiral, Cadet Vorthak said slowly, are you claiming that humans alter reality? I'm claiming that human military operations produce results that cannot be explained by conventional physics, Admiral Kethvar replied carefully. Whether this constitutes altering reality or simply operating according to principles we don't yet understand is a question for philosophers. But how is this possible? Demanded Cadet Brakthar. Humans have no special technology, no enhanced biology, no obvious capabilities that would explain these effects. Admiral Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been rueful amusement. That question brings us to the real answer to our original inquiry. What is the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine? Which is? Undefined, because the question itself is based on false assumptions, Admiral Kethvar stated. We assumed that military effectiveness could be measured in terms of direct casualties inflicted. But humans don't fight wars the same way other species do. How do they fight them? They fight the idea of war itself, Admiral Kethvar explained. Every human military victory makes future conflicts less likely, not just against humans, but against anyone. I don't understand. Admiral Kethvar brought up a new display showing galactic conflict statistics over the past decade. Since humans joined the coalition, overall military conflicts have decreased by 47%, not just conflicts involving humans, but conflicts between all species. Why? Because humans have introduced the concept that war is a problem to be solved rather than a competition to be won, Admiral Kethvar explained. Other species fight until one side achieves victory. Humans fight until war itself becomes impossible. How do they make war impossible? By demonstrating that the cost of fighting humans exceeds any possible benefit, Admiral Kethvar said. But more importantly, by showing other species new ways to resolve conflicts that don't require military action. He gestured, and the display showed a timeline of diplomatic successes. Human negotiators have resolved more territorial disputes in 10 years than the coalition had settled in the previous century. Because other species are afraid to fight them? Because humans approach negotiations the same way they approach warfare, Admiral Kethvar corrected. They make peace more attractive than conflict by understanding what each side actually needs and finding creative solutions that satisfy everyone. That still doesn't explain the reality alteration effects, pointed out Cadet Silthes. Doesn't it? Admiral Kethvar challenged. What if human military effectiveness isn't about individual combat capability? What if it's about their ability to change the fundamental nature of the conflicts they're involved in? Change how? By turning every military engagement into a demonstration that fighting humans is ultimately self-defeating, Admiral Kethvar explained. When enemies encounter human forces, they don't just face tactical opposition, they face proof that their entire approach to warfare is obsolete. That's psychological warfare on a galactic scale, realized Cadet Elthrani. Precisely. And the effects extend far beyond the immediate battlefield, Admiral Kethvar confirmed. Once a species realizes that humans fight by completely different rules, they begin questioning all their assumptions about conflict resolution, which leads to the probability field effects. Enemies begin making decisions based on the knowledge that traditional military thinking doesn't apply when facing humans, Admiral Kethvar explained. This uncertainty propagates through their command structures, affecting decisions even in situations where no humans are present. Cadet Zixta leaned back in her seat, her crystalline features reflecting the holographic displays. So the answer to our original question, the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine is not a number, Admiral Kethvar concluded. It's a paradigm shift. Every human military operation changes the way their opponents think about warfare itself. But that doesn't explain specific victories like Sergeant Vasquez or Staff Sergeant Chen, protested Cadet Brakthar. Doesn't it? Admiral Kethvar smiled. Sergeant Vasquez didn't defend a space station. She demonstrated that fixed defensive positions are obsolete when your opponent can turn the environment itself into an ally. Staff Sergeant Chen didn't defeat 200,000 enemy troops. He proved that numerical superiority becomes meaningless when your enemy can make you defeat yourself. And the temporal anomalies? When opponents know that conventional tactics are useless against humans, they begin changing their strategies before encountering humans directly, Admiral Kethvar explained. The mere possibility of facing human forces alters decision-making processes. So humans win by making war impossible to fight effectively? They win by making war impossible to fight rationally, Admiral Kethvar corrected. When facing humans, enemies must choose between accepting defeat or engaging in conflicts they know they cannot win using any logical strategy. Cadet Merdia's aquatic features rippled with understanding. That's why the hegemony has been avoiding direct confrontation with coalition forces lately. Correct. Human military doctrine has achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, Admiral Kethvar confirmed. They've made large-scale warfare strategically obsolete. But how does this help the coalition in the long term? Asked Cadet Vorthak. If humans make conventional military planning impossible, how do we develop effective defense strategies? Admiral Kethvar's expression became grave. That question brings us to the real reason these lectures were authorized by High Command. We need officers who understand that our future military doctrine cannot be based on traditional conflict models. What will it be based on? Problem-solving, environmental integration, and psychological strategy, Admiral Kethvar listed. Human approaches to warfare that treat military conflicts as engineering challenges rather than competitive events. Are we learning to fight like humans? We're learning to think like humans, Admiral Kethvar corrected, because the alternative is becoming obsolete in our own military structures. What do you mean? Humans don't just fight enemies more effectively than other species, Admiral Kethvar explained. They solve the problems that create enemies in the first place. Within a generation, traditional military thinking may become as obsolete as siege warfare or cavalry charges. And if we can't adapt, Admiral Kethvar's 4 eyes focused on the assembled cadets with an expression of absolute seriousness. Then we become the next species trying to figure out how to fight an impossible war against opponents who refuse to follow the rules we think are universal. You're saying humans might become our enemies? I'm saying that humans have redefined what victory means, Admiral Kethvar stated. Victory is no longer about defeating your enemies. Victory is about making the concept of having enemies irrelevant. And the casualty ratio question? Admiral Kethvar shut down the holographic displays, leaving the auditorium in natural lighting. The casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine is every war that doesn't happen because potential enemies realize that fighting is pointless. Every war that doesn't happen? Every conflict resolved through negotiation instead of force. Every territorial dispute settled through creative compromise. Every potential enemy who chooses cooperation over confrontation, Admiral Kethvar explained. Humans measure military success not in casualties inflicted, but in casualties prevented. How many casualties has human military doctrine prevented? Admiral Kethvar consulted his datapad one final time. According to Coalition strategic analysis, human approaches to conflict resolution have prevented an estimated 47 million casualties over the past decade. 47 million people who didn't die because humans changed how we think about war? 47 million sentient beings from across the galaxy who are alive today because humans demonstrated that most conflicts can be resolved without violence, Admiral Kethvar confirmed. Cadet Zixta searched for words. That's not military science. That's something else entirely. It's human science, Admiral Kethvar said simply. And it's the future of how civilized species will resolve conflicts. As the cadets filed out of the auditorium for the last time, their conversations carried a different tone than the previous days. The fear and confusion had been replaced by something more complex. Understanding that they were witnessing the evolution of warfare itself. The question that had started their journey, what is the casualty ratio for a single Earth Marine, had been answered in a way none of them had expected. It wasn't a number. It was a revolution in thinking that made the question itself obsolete. Tomorrow, they would begin learning how to fight wars by making war unnecessary. Today, they simply tried to comprehend how one species had managed to change the fundamental nature of conflict in the galaxy without firing a shot. The humans, it seemed, had won the ultimate victory. They had made victory itself irrelevant by teaching everyone else how to solve problems without creating casualties in the first place.